Hello and welcome to the Warhammer YouTube channel. Today we'll be talking about Warcry, the new skirmish combat game set in the Age of Sigmar universe, and we'll be specifically talking about the Unmade faction. So let's get into the data. Okay, let's talk a little bit overall about this faction, and then I'll talk about the leader, and then I'll talk about the troop choices, and I'll throw you out two example lists when we're done with that. So, overall, this faction, if you haven't seen my best and worst fighters video, I recommend you check that out. It's in the same playlist. The Blissful One was mentioned in there, I believe, a couple times for having the best attack profile and being the best leader, and that it should give you an idea of what's the overall story with this warband. You have a great leader, and everybody else is kind of there just to support the leader. Like, there's good, solid, average troop choices, but nothing really stands out. This warband is about having a real demon on the tabletop and creating problems for your enemies, trying to maximize the power done by this super boss. So let's take a look at the super boss, the Blissful One, a whopping 220 points. There's more expensive things in the game, but he's certainly on the upper end of the scale. 20 wounds, move 8, so he's going to be able to really zip around. Now, the closest comparison that has about the same number of wounds and the same attack profile is the Cipher Lord's leader, the Thrall Master. The Thrall Master doesn't move as fast as this one, so you're paying those extra points really for these 3 extra movement you get in the Blissful One versus the Cipher Lords. But very similar leaders here between those two warbands. It's all toughness 4, strength 4, nothing special. Like I said, those aren't too big of a deal. Common theme in this channel yet. You should notice that 5 attacks, like I said, I think the number of attacks really puts, if you sort based on the number of damage you do, things fall, I think are going to fall pretty neatly into bins based on the number of attacks. So he's top tier in all of his attack profile stuff. He becomes a little bit expensive in the points per wound, and he's toughness 4, so the effect of that comes out to be still quite expensive compared to the average in the warbands. So what this has changed from previous videos. If you've watched previous videos, I kind of made some assumptions about the distribution of strength and the distribution of toughness, and now I've had the opportunity to look at all the data, and based on all that data, I've revised my formulas so that the average number of attacks to kill, I've switched to calling it that because it has all this new data. So that's going to reflect how well this leader does with his 20 wounds against attacks from strength 2, attacks from strength 3, 4, 5, and even strength 6, based on the average base damage done by attacks in the game, which is 1.59, and the average critical damage done by attacks in the game, which is 4.03, I believe it is. So based on that average data, how many attacks at the different strengths can this fighter, how many attacks does it take to kill this fighter? So, and based on the distribution of the different strength values that are taken from the actual unit stats, it should take an average of 17.92 attacks to kill this fighter. So that's an idea of where I'm going with that stat. Just trying to get a metric that encompasses the real world survivability of the unit. So it doesn't really reflect the numbers as they apply to the tabletop, like how many of what things people are taking. These are numbers that I'm just taken from the unit profiles, but it's the best I have to work with currently. Okay, so if you take his number of points divided by the amount of attacks it takes to kill, we get to that points per average wound or points per attack to kill, whatever. Like I said, he's still expensive. That's a good indication of how expensive is his overall durability, and he's, instead of just arbitrary coloring these things now, since I've been able to fit a lot of the data into like a bell curve, I've been able to calculate the standard deviations, and based on where it falls on the bell curve, above, below, beyond a standard deviation, half a standard deviation, so on and so forth, the coloring of the cells, of the various different cell values, actually have meaning. So This isn't just my gut opinion of where this value falls in relation to everything else. This is actually, the red on this coloring means it's below 1 full standard deviation from the average points per attacks to kill. Okay. So this column here, we'll see it'll make a little bit more sense for the rest of the troops. But what I've done is just kind of taken this and this value here, the number of attacks to kill, and taken the average damage done game-wide against the toughness value of this model, which you can see down here is 3.92, and rounded that, because you need to round up, because you can be, if you don't do enough damage, it's going to take a whole nother activation to kill. So this is basically that value rounded up to the next whole number. So it's going to take, if an average fighter in the game across all strength variants do 3.92 damage, and it's going to take them an average of 6 activations to kill this fighter. Okay. So this fighter's a little bit expensive for his durability, but that's really not why you're taking him. You're taking him for this damage stat here. This is the best damage output in the game for a base profile. Like I'm sure there's abilities that can sway it one way or another, but just for sheer base damage, no abilities used, nobody can compete. It's tied with the Thrall Master, but there's nothing that's doing better than this currently. And for his point value, it's still a good buy for this amount of damage. It's not great. The Thrall Master's, I believe, a little cheaper, so that one comes out to be a little bit more efficient. The big difference here between this and the Thrall Master is this one has more wounds and more durability for the price, whereas the Thrall Master is cheaper, but he has less durability. So you're kind of sliding the scale towards just pure damage output with that leader and that faction in general. I've added columns here. This is a departure from the previous videos to show you the effect of using the Onslaught ability versus, for example, the Agony ability. So Onslaught is going to be the double ability that's going to add 1 to attacks, just so that we can compare against things like the Chain Garrote, where there's one of our troop choices has the option of using this this ability, and there's also Flayed Flesh or something like that another one gets. So you can see if you have a double, or do you want to use the Chain Garrote or do you want to use Onslaught, and you can see how those numbers work out. So Agony is a 4-point ability that I can't recall off the top of my head. Let me just peek at the abilities real quick. Gift of Agony, makes a bonus attack action, so that's purely added. It's a quad, but you add 1 to the strength and attacks if the fighter has suffered damage. So there's some ifs in there, but you get an idea. In that bonus extra attack, if you add 1 to the strength and 1 to the attacks value, this is the average damage that this fighter's doing in that with that ability. So nice, healthy number there. He doesn't have access to these other abilities, so I don't need to talk about that now. But yeah, there's only one leader option, so you don't have any choice. If you wanted to play this faction, you have to take the Blissful one, but he's kind of the whole point of this faction. So moving on, I'm going to hide the Blissful one just so we don't get our data confused here. Okay, so with our troops, we don't have any true elites in terms of point values or anything else really. We have a semi-elite option, which is this Joyous one. He had 145 points. We have one thing on the upper end of what I would consider line infantry, not quite semi-elite, but at 125 points, we have the Ascended one, who takes the Warrior rune. And then we have just 2 options of chaff. It's really just one type of troop with 2 different weapon options. So you have the Awakened one with the Flail, and the Awakened one with the Polearm, and I'll examine all those options. Let's start out talking about the Joyous one. So this guy is the only 15 wound troop choice we have. Everything else is 10. So this is a very low overall durability warband. It's not the worst in that department, but it certainly tends towards low durability as opposed to, like, I don't know. Well, most things are low durability compared to like Iron Golems, but of all the starting Chaos band, this is one of the least durable options. And So the Joyous one has a movement 5. He's the only troop that is anything but 4, so he's a quicker option. That's notable. He has a nicely strong 4 attacks, 2 damage, 4 crit profile, but so does the Ascended one. So it's notable that these two options have the same net damage. They're different damage dealing types, but currently there's no rules to make those effectively any different, but who knows, maybe next edition the fact that one's a dagger and one's a sword might mean something, but not currently. Scrolling on, I will briefly hop back to the abilities tab so we can compare the Destroyer and the Warrior runes. Okay. So the Warrior rune, this Chain Garrote, is a double ability. That's important because double is super easy. You're pretty much, I think it'd be very difficult to roll 6 dice and not get a double, but and especially considering that you have a wild dice, to roll a dice and not get either a double or a single would be very difficult. So you're always going to have the ability to potentially pull this one off. The triple, still pretty likely, but it's a bit more of an investment. So Chain Garrote, you roll a dice on a 3 or 4. The fighter takes 1 damage. On a 5 or 6, they take the number of damage equal to the value of the ability. So that's going to ignore any sort of toughness value. And Destroyer, it's the same thing, same ability, but for each enemy fighter within 3 inches, it's going to pull that off. So it's a smaller bubble. This one up here, the Chain Garrote, is 5, and this one's 3, but it's the exact same damage type potential. So I'll show you the calculations for how much damage that comes out as. But the key point here is that you get to pick when to use this ability. Like you're going to know the value of this triple, and you're going to know the value of this double. So there's going to be times when it's going to be the average damage output of these things is going to vary, but you have some sway into the average the damage output there. Okay. Coming back, comparing the Joyous and Ascended. Even though they're different point values, I think it's worth comparing them. The Joyous one has a better points per wound because he has 5 extra wounds versus the 10 here, and but he's not 50% more expensive. He's only a little bit more expensive, so he comes out to be a better value, a bargain. He's still a little bit pricey, but the Ascended one is quite pricey for the wounds that you get. Okay. Like I said, these columns here are how durable this unit is against attacks from the various strength levels. So how many attacks on average, assuming that attacks do an average of 1.59 damage, or damage base, and 4.03 damage critical, which is the average across the entire game. It would take 16.01 attacks from strength 2, whatever, and 10.23 from strength 6. You get the idea. Average these together and divide by the points and get to an idea of the durability for the points. The Joyous one is just a better deal for the durability on the tabletop. And it is important to note that for 125 points, 8.96 is just not a great number. He's only slightly more durable than your chaff. So that's something to keep aware of, is that he's obviously going to hit a lot harder than your chaff, but he's just, we're in the paper tiger, I guess, territory here with this fighter. And I've taken the average damage done against toughness 4, which is what he is, 3.92, and been able to use that number to sort in here, show you the number of average activations that would be required to kill this fighter. So it would take an average of 4 activations to kill a Joyous one, but it would only take an average of 3 to kill the Ascended one. And just because of the overkill here, if you're doing this much damage on average, which is average across the game, that amount of damage difference just doesn't turn into a whole activation's worth of benefit. So that's a common theme here. Depending on what you're up against, a slight change in durability might not have any effect on the tabletop. And by the same token, having an extremely undurable unit that's very cheap, like, for example, the Ether Wing, if that's going to take 2 activations to kill, whereas this, Awakened one might take 2 activations to kill, even though this Awakened one has more wounds and more durability than the Ether Wing, it doesn't matter if it's still going to take against a certain enemy 2 activations to kill it. So causing your enemy to overkill your troops is a good thing. They're wasting their time. Okay. So moving on to the damage output of those two, we see they have the same damage output profile, and so since the Ascended one is cheaper, he is a better value for that damage. This is a nice, low tier elite amount of damage. So for a line infantry, even though he's on the upper end of line infantry, this is actually a very good amount of damage output for 125 points. I think it's a good troop. Now, what those look like if you're using Onslaught, and this is where we have a choice to make, because, like I said, the numbers work out the same. You have to remember, though, that the Joyous one, his ability, the Flayed Flesh or something like that, it's a 3-inch bubble, so it can affect multiple enemies, and the Chain Garrote is only one enemy, but at a slightly longer range. So, but the math works out the same. So, if you use your double ability on the Joyous one to get him a +1 to his attack, this 5.45 becomes 6.82 average damage. If you use the quad Agony ability, so to add 1 to strength and 1 to the attacks, and it's an extra attack, that should be important to note, that his damage output would be 8.03 for that. This, I say, is important to let you know, if you do spend your 4 dice on an Agony ability, make it either the Joyous one or the Ascended one, or if for whatever reason your boss isn't an option, because they're going to make, they're obviously going to do the most damage, make the most benefit of that extra attack. Okay, so the question here is, should you use a double dice on the Chain Garrote or the average Onslaught? So if you're in combat, it would be an option if you weren't locked in combat within attack strike range. The Chain Garrote and Flayed Flesh could be hit something from further away. But if you're in combat, let's check it out. So the difference here, it looks like Onslaught adds an average of 1.37 average damage to the output, and across all, if you had no control over whether it's being used on a double 1, double 2, double 6, whatever, just across all dice, the Chain Garrote is doing it an average of 1.5 damage per when it's activated. And if you say, I'm only going to use it when the double dice is 4 and above, then it's doing 2 average damage. And you can see, if you make a policy, I'm only going to use it on a 5, then it's going to be a little higher than that. And if you only use it on a 6, it's going to be higher than that. But even across all possible dice, it's slightly outperforming Onslaught. So that's important to note. Chain Garrote, generally, you're probably going to use it. I think if it's a 1, maybe, I should have probably calculated that, but if it's a 1, I think it might underperform it. So keep that in mind. Probably save it for 3s and above, I would say, to be safe. Okay. Yeah. So I don't have a way to quantify the benefit of the Joyous ones, of the Flayed Flesh area bubble, but I would say that since he could hit multiple enemies, you'd probably only be using that when you are hitting multiple enemies, and just to be conservative, say hitting 2 enemies at once, so that every time you activated that, if you activated that on a 4 up, you're doing 4 damage for an activation on average. So something to be aware of, but that's a triple versus a double for the Warrior Rune ability, the Chain Garrote. Okay, so those are pretty easy to compare. We have 2 options in the Awakened one, the one with the flail and the one with the polearm. So let's compare these. They are both toughness 3, so they're a little weaker. Only 10 wounds, but they're only 60 points, so it's kind of right in that middle range for chaff. Pretty average chaff. The flail one has a range 3 attack and a backup range 1 dagger, and the polearm only has the 2-inch spear. And it looks like the polearm is doing a 4 critical, but he's only doing 2 attacks. Let's see how the numbers play out on that when we get to damage. They are both very nice buys, points per wound. So they're on the upper end of the scale there. This means the blue puts them above half a standard deviation above the average, so they're good. They're not like exquisitely good, but they're very, very good buys for the wounds. Okay, scrolling across, like I said, it's going to take an average of 7.39 attacks to kill them, which for most things is going to be 2 activations. Actually, I'm sorry, 3 activations. But actually, yeah, okay. Oh, that was calculated against toughness 4. My bad. This might not be valid. Okay. The points per average attack to kill is going to be 8.12. So this beats the average across the game, but it's not anything spectacular. But it's nice. So nice value for your durability. The toughness, so the damage output. So let's compare these damage outputs, because this is what I wanted to talk about. The first profile here is the 3-inch weapon range. This one is the 1-inch backup, and this is the last one here is the polearm with the 2-inch range. And you can see, here's my concern, is that the polearm just barely outperforms the 3-inch range weapon. He just barely performs it at range, and the polearm version does not have the backup of the dagger that clearly outperforms this 1.76. So best case scenario, like these two are basically even. So you're giving up 1 inch of range for almost no benefit in damage output, and you're sacrificing a much better damage output at 1 inch. So I'm a little bit confused as to why this polearm is so bad. I think, if you bought this kit, I would hope, you're only going to come, I think it's only going to come with the ability to build so many flails, but this is one of those rare opportunities where the 2 options you can build, one is just clearly superior. The only way it could be any more clear is if this 0.17 points was gone and these were actually equal, then it would be there'd be no argument that could be made. There's still a slight argument. I could see you could say, well, I'm always outside of 1 inch and nobody can ever come within 1 inch of me, so I'll never use this dagger. Okay, whatever, but I don't think that's realistic, and I think the flail is just a much better option at all times. And you get the extra 1 inch doing 3 inches away, particularly if you're talking about chaff and you're going to have a whole bunch of them, a whole bunch of guys with 3-inch weapons running around. That's not insignificant. Okay, and the price per damage on these guys isn't awesome. It's on the lower side of average. The yellow is so. You can see not spectacular, and just not a ton of damage being done in general with these damage output values are low, but not shockingly low, but chaff level low. Okay, if we use Onslaught with these, we get still not great levels of damage output, but the dagger one with Onslaught becomes mildly okay. And I don't know why you would waste Agony on one of these guys. You're still not going to really kill much with Agony, so don't waste your Agony on an Awakened one. All right, so I think that covers the Awakened ones. Really, if you can tell me a good reason why polearm isn't just objectively bad, and any explanation to why that should be taken instead of a flail, I would love to hear it. It just doesn't make sense to me. I've double checked these numbers. This is correct. This is just a weak sauce troop choice option. But if you bought the kit and you have to make some of these polearm guys, you don't want to go out and buy more Awakened more of these unmade kits just to have the optimized perfect warband. Fine. But the point of this video is to try to, if you want to know what is mathematically a better choice, this is one of those rare cases where I can just say very confidently the flail is just better than the polearm. End of story. Don't even, it doesn't need to be discussed too much further. Okay, so my MVPs for this warband, I will say, since the boss is not really an option because you have to take him. He's clearly the actual MVP on the tabletop. It's just, this is a warband that's all about the boss, I believe. But I really think the good value here in this warband is the Joyous One. He is, you can see you have to make a choice here between the Joyous One and the Ascended One, and they're pretty similar with their damage, but we do get a better value of the Joyous One with his durability, and because of it, it's enough extra durability where it'll probably take more actual activations to kill him. I think he's going to get a little bit better use out of him, and his additional wounds. Yeah, his extra movement is going to be handy. He's the only thing outside of your leader that can move more than average. The average movement in the game is under 5, so he's above average. So okay, so that's my MVP. Would be the Joyous One, with the caveat that obviously the Blissful One is the big guy in campus here. So let's get into list building. I'm going to throw you out 2 options, and these 2 options are going to be based on how elite focused you want this warband to be. And it's a risky move going elite because your elites in this warband are not very durable. So, just have a strategy behind it. I think maybe the safer option here would be to go with more chaff, but you're going to be able to output more damage with more elites. So first option, the elite heavy build I'm going to go with is obviously the Blissful One leader. I'm going to go with a full 2 Joyous Ones and 2 Ascended Ones. So an even split there. And I like the splitting, even though I give my preferred status to the Joyous One. I do think you're going to use those 2 different abilities in different times. And the Ascended One is cheaper, so it's going to allow us to, just from a realistic fitting points in perspective, I can't just take 4 Joyous Ones and have a good list. So 2 Joyous Ones, 2 Ascended Ones, and that leaves us room for 4 Awakened Ones with Flail. And I'm not taking any Awakened Ones with Polearm. So if you have too many guys with Polearms, hopefully your opponent will be okay with you proxying. Just don't bring those Polearms. Okay, so for the second list option, let's go with another leader, the Blissful One. I'm going to stick with the 2 Joyous, because I think that's going to be a good backbone of our list, is these slightly fast-moving, hard-hitting guys. Since I'm going to cut back a little bit on elites, I'm going to cut back on the Ascended One, and I'm only going to go with 1 of them, but I still put him in there. But by cutting that down to 1, that frees us up to take a total of 6 chaff. So my only chaff choice here is the Awakened One with Flail, so obviously I'm taking 6 of those. So I think I like this list. This is a good solid list. You have plenty of chaff, and it's good chaff, cheap, not the best damage dealing, but range 3 across all the chaff. That's nice. So this is a solid list. You can obviously diverge from this. I don't think it's going to be terribly important, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of the better lists out there for this faction end up looking a lot like one of these 2 that I've thrown out. So that's all I have for you today. I think next faction I will be covering will probably be from the... it's not going to be a Chaos faction, even though I have more Chaos to do, so I'm going to hop back over to either the Stormcast or the Nighthaunt. So we'll see where my feelings lie, and I'm also planning to do a best and worst warbands video to kind of pair with my best and worst fighters video. So a lot of things in the works. It's going to be a busy week. So hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.